Greetings, everybody. This is Kharyshi Wiginton, and I am the Special Projects Manager for the Center for Third World Organizing, C2. And I have a beautiful treat for you all today. I'm joined with Evelin Aquino, one of my dearest friends. We go back, like 20 something years, right? And we grew up in the work together. And Evelin has some exciting news and information that she wants to share with us about the work that she's doing. Work that I believe will really help your organizational culture. And so I've invited her on to do a mini workshop for you all. We're going to do interview style, okay? So Evelin Aquino is my guest. Evelin, how you doing, girl?
Hello, everyone.
Evelin, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you define yourself professionally.
My name is Evelin Aquino, and I am a trainer, facilitator, somewhat what they call a cultural worker, cultural strategist. I believe in the work that I do is paradigm shifting in some ways, given it's so counterculture of our mainstream culture of the work in terms of heart, being in communication and being in community and in harmony, which is really at the heart of the work that I do.
All right,
And yeah, I work with both adults and youth.
cool. Yes, well, that's one of the areas that we line up on is doing youth work as well as adult work.
Hmm.
So, I want to know what are some key experiences from your life that have informed both the work that you choose to do and how you approach the work, how you show up in the work.
Some aspects of my work is that I started working as a young person. I started doing movement work and organizational work as a young person, and so started developing skills and being in community and in collaboration with adults. So one thing that is major for me is the capacity that I had at a young age to do leadership work, and to be mentored and supported by older people. They weren't all elders, since I was so young, but being in those spaces where there was teaching, learning, but also a lot of respect, reciprocated. So that lies at the heart of what I do, in terms of that respect. I'm also a child of immigrants and first
Mm.
generation American, and that really shaped a lot of my identity. And so being in spaces where I was spoken of or not spoken of or not taken into accordance into conversations when we're talking about whatever issue the organization that I'm working on, but lived experiences and the power of that when we're at the table doing whatever is at the heart of the work. And so my approach is always about including people, their stories and their lived experiences as part of the solution of things that are impacting them. So between that in language accessibility, I think in some spaces people can get very intellectual about topics that we're talking about and not accessible to folks who have not either been in those spaces of dialogue or university level conversations. And I think that conversations and our topics should be accessible to people. And more than anything, to speak from the heart. I really believe in the power of the heart and the intelligence of the heart, and the power of healing in a lot of the things that we talk about and a lot of our issues.
That's real. Thank you for that. So, I hear you wrote a book. This is exciting.
It
It's such
is.
a pivotal moment in your life, I'm sure, and a great offering to the work. So, tell us about your book. What is it called? What is it about? Give us all the cheese, man.
So this book was born out of a dear friend, with a dear in conversation with a dear friend that also does youth leadership work for a long time. I was like, girl, we should write a book because there's all these books that come out about topics, and they're usually super perspective of adults or but there's something about working with young people that you get to see and you get to hear and you get to be with the perspective, the development that happens in conscious raising, but also in solution building, that is often left out. There's always, our school systems are very much built on the banking system, like you take what we're giving you. But as a youth worker and again, someone that came up in the work as a young person, there was a lot of spaces and a lot of times that we had solutions that were much better than what the adults were saying.
Hmm.
And so that was really born from that space. And my co-author, I have two co-authors, one Heather Manchester from Oakland, and Anita Vadva, who is also a youth worker and an educator, now a principal. But all three of us connected on the basis that young people have solutions, and especially as the work that all of us were doing in restorative justice work as youth leaders, being able not only to hold circles, but to be in the conversations about transforming the systems that created the situation that we're calling for restorative practices. Um, but really that their perspective as we're doing both conflict management or looking at policies needing to change to be more sustainable for both schools or community, we came together to say let's bring young people to the forefront of this conversation because there wasn't anything really out there for young people's voices to be heard.
Hmm.
So we connected with it's the three of us. Anita's from Houston, and Heather's from Oakland. And so we connected with the young people that we work with and that we had been building with or we mentored and collected their voices and worked with them to bring about much of the information in the books along with our experiences. So it was a dope process because we're all what we call practitioners or we live the work. Um, we wrote the book in that way.
Hmm.
So we're three very different women from very different walks of life. And so we wrote our book in circle. There was a lot of dialogue and a lot of things that we had to sort of process, whether it was our learning abilities. Anita has a PhD from Harvard. Um, Heather has a peace and conflict resolution master's from Ireland. So and myself, I've just been a practitioner. I have a bachelor's from UMass, but it's more of just we were so different in our approaches. So it was really dope to write this book from a place that felt accessible. One, because it's in a little book series, so that was important. That we weren't going super philosophical and academic in the writing, but also that that were writing along with young people. That much of what we were writing in the book was from their perspective, and that we were very committed that this was a book that to be used not only in schools but in communities. So the process was just really amazing to bring forth this information and to put words to so many things that were really deep and powerful. This is Anita's second book, but this was Heather and I's first book, and we wrote it during the pandemic, all online, just like this, in dialogue. Every day we became the best of friends. Heather was already a good friend of mine, but Anita, that we became sister friends because as the world was falling apart during the pandemic, we're in circle writing this book about the power of coming together and finding solutions together. It was quite the experience.
Nice. You brought up circles, so I'm gonna circle back to that. No pun intended.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna come
Mm-hmm.
back to that because I think it's important. But I really want to lift up the idea of restorative justice, restorative practices, because that's really what the book centers on, right?
Totally. Mm-hmm.
And so, if you were going to define restorative justice or restorative practice for the folks, um, what would you say it is? What's the core of it, and then why is it important?
The core of it is really counter our carceral society way of doing things. Like you're bad, you get sent away, you're gonna get punished, and it's really a counter of it's countering that ideology that we're gonna split or cut or cancel, but really it's a coming together. How can we find solutions to the conflict that exists because we're all human, um, and find harmony and understanding. Committed to our growth, committed to our possibilities of finding solutions together, of finding ways to honor one another and honor one another's humanity. So restorative practice is really in that work is that honoring of the humanity of each and every one of us with the idea that conflict is going to happen. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's, super hard, but there's always the opportunity for healing. And that's, when we talk about restorative practices, it's creating a culture. Um, and particularly this is in schools, but it moves beyond that of ways of being that create opportunities for growth and opportunities for connection, opportunities for belonging, opportunities for healing. So that's, I don't have elevator pitch for how I talk about restorative practices or restorative justice, but it's really at the heart of it is our humanity and honoring that.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so and I think that that's good, especially because so many organizations that are striving to be liberatory in their
Mm-hmm.
practices consider themselves abolitionists, right, or having abolitionist values. And so when you say that restorative practice is really an alternative for embracing the carceral system, then it makes sense to me, right? I would ask, what role do circles play? Like, why a circle? What is important about a circle?
The circle is ancestral wisdom.
Mm,
Ancestral wisdom long before we had all these material things and ways to disconnect us, but really an opportunity to just be human to human. Let's come to center. And the power of the circle is, you find circle in nature. It's closed. It's continual. It's infinity. And
mm,
the power of being able to sit in circle is to be able to listen to one another, to hear, to see each other. And there's a power in that when you're in the practice of it, of connection, but it's also a holding, like a holding space where we're coming together. And in that process is also the trust building.
mm-hmm,
We're in a deficit of trust in our society today for all kinds of reasons. And so circles are, you know, a practice, indigenous and global, global, that that we come together and we are intending and committed to holding what is going on, who's in the circle, and what's happening in the circle. And I don't want to say done right, but with the right intention and the right practice, that can be a very healing and growing space.
mm-hmm. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Yeah, I always think about the term "let the circle be unbroken," and where how we are able to derive strength from that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just have two more questions for you, and this
Sure.
one I think is important because part of this conference, the Liberatory Leadership
Mm-hmm.
Conference, Living Liberation. Part of our conference, we want to allow people to focus on. We want folks to focus on tools, right? We want to be able to get them to focus on the idea of praxis. So we want to give them some tools that they can start to put into their everyday praxis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and hopefully begin shifting culture and shifting the dynamics for that, right? To that
Mm-hmm.
end, what are three? I was going to do five, but for the sake of time, we'll just do three. What are three big things you think for any organization that's a liberatory organization that is striving to incorporate restorative practices in their culture as a workplace? What are like three things like you think that they should start to implement and like play around with?
It's so powerful, and but it becomes difficult because of the society that we live in. But authentic community building, really honoring who is in the space, like in terms of your coworkers, and finding opportunities to do that, whether it's the intentional hello, good morning, I'm glad
Mm,
to see you, welcome, to work, or I'm happy you're here. We're going through so much in our individual lives that being able to be in a space where we're seen, heard, and valued goes a very, very long way with how people can show up, and people being able to show up as their best selves. And along with that, in order to build community, is to have deep listening, right? And really moving away from this culture that we're robots, right? And creating space where people are able to build trust through deep listening, where it's like, oh, I'm struggling with this, or I don't know how to do that, or I'm good at that. Oh yeah, she's good at that. Like, so really lifting people up, to be at their best, but also engaging and inviting an agency for people to step into their
mm,
best selves. And and then another one, I'm looking at a page here and I'm going to show it. We have a little chart and we break down some elements of components of leadership and restorative justice that we found in our process of writing the
Mm-hmm.
book and listening to young people that were really, really powerful elements of doing this work authentically. And of the six, I will also pick self and community care. Um, Again, especially in our times right now, people are going through a lot. How do we take
Mm-hmm.
care of each other? How do we do this work from that authentic place? How do we take care of each other? Grinding and working 70 hours a week is not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we be fair, but also accountable, right? How do we
Mm-hmm.
create the work, but also take good care of each other because we're taking care of families, we're part of other networks. That, so being the change that we want to see, and that being intentional in workplaces. So
But
that's
what does that look
mhm,
like beyond jargon, right? Like it sounds easy. Like it sounds
mhm.
like sure, I will do self and community care. But what does that look like as an actual practice? Like what's something an organization can do as a practice to illustrate that?
I think it's giving people grace when
Mm-hmm.
they're going through a hard time, right? Many of our um, workplace policies are built around produce, produce, produce. But if someone just lost someone in their family, or someone is grieving, or someone is having a challenging situation in their family, how do we work around that? How do we support one another? Um, so that, you know, that when we talk about care, it's about really caring, like shifting and being flexible in how things are done. Again, a lot of policies and workplace policies have not allowed that. You got, by any means necessary, you got to be sitting in that seat in the office, you got to be producing, and you know, it's not doing us any well and hasn't been. um,
That's right.
Self-care is, you know, maybe it's in the morning, making sure you're encouraging folks to take some time to get grounded, right? Like that's a practice before staff meeting. The first, you know, 5 minutes of just getting grounded, coming together, taking that moment, shifting, bringing everyone to be present, you know, doing some deep breathing. Or when a situation comes up, right? Like some organizations, there's a lot of intensity. So how do you engage and invite in time to get grounded before we go into this meeting, before we go into this crisis that we're dealing with? Let's take some time to breathe and really learning the power of that breathing. I'm teaching everyone on the staff. So those are very small examples, but how do you know that caring, but also attentive? Someone, you know, as a practice in the office, when people are going through things, show up for each other, even if it's just
Mm-hmm.
sending flowers, even if it's just a card, even if it's a meal or two. I think those are practices that build community and people feel valued.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. And what's one last one?
Um, as that authentic community building is happening, I think it's also taking time to learn about what people are going through in society, right? So many times things will be happening in the office or in the world that people who are impacted by those things have to just show up, and no one in the office is talking about a situation, let's say that's happened either global or even neighborhood, right? But taking that time to say, how can we be of support to that, whether it's legislation, whether it's you know, a policy in the city that's happening, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of just showing up for each other. I think the other one that I want to add, that I want to do last, is creating a practice in the workplace of holding circles or opportunities for restorative, um, to restore when there's conflict. You know, really creating
Mm-hmm.
a place where um, that connection is important. That when it gets broken, that we're
Mm-hmm.
able to come to center and figure out, we don't want to be living like this, right? How many people have complete workplace drama and have that disconnect, and it just becomes a cancer, it becomes toxic. So being attentive to that as a staff, and especially as a
Mm-hmm.
leader, and saying we're going to institute these practices when these things come up, this is how we're going to handle it, we're going to take the time to address them, because sometimes they get addressed, but they get addressed negatively. They don't, they're not,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not in support of the healing of both the relationship or even the issue, but really instituting places where, like, we're not going to let, we're going to heal each other, we're going to heal whatever's happening, at least attempt to, so that we don't get sick individually or collectively.
You're right. I think, so often when we're dealing with this capitalist system, the person, the actual entity is not what is important. You talked about
Mhm.
honoring somebody's humanity earlier, but it's that the service, the production, the work is what is valued, not the
Mhm.
person who is doing that. So I appreciate all of that. So the three that we have are authentic community building, self and community care, and then figuring out how to create opportunities to hold circles. Especially, I would say the circles for community building, but I would
Mhm.
also say the circles when there is some level of like harm or conflict,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so that folks have an opportunity to figure that out. My
Mhm.
when I was in when I played high softball in high school, um, my coach, we called them bitch sessions. Now the title isn't good, but what it was like once a week we got to like get in circle, right? And
Mhm.
he didn't. His name was Wes. He was a beautiful spirit, and he was doing things intuitively and with being very well meaning, but
Mhm.
didn't necessarily have the skill set to go along with it, right?
Yeah.
But what he knew was he had a team full of girls that were conflict was always arising, and it was impacting how we played together. And so I think he was like, how do we deal with the conflict so that we can actually like perform as a team? And so
Mhm.
we had these sessions like once a week, and we could air our grievances. Like in this
Mhm.
circle, we could be like, yo, you keep missing practice and you don't know how to catch or whatever. And like
Mhm.
and we stayed in those circles until we worked through the problem so that then we can, pick up our mitts, get the ball and get to work and
Mhm.
leave it there in that session. Leave
Mhm.
the junk in the session. So I think that's so important. Woo. All right.
Yeah.
So my very last question for you is if more liberatory organizations and businesses start embracing restorative practices, what's the impact? Like what's the potential impact you see?
I think people can show up more whole. How many times does the workplace just break people down in so many different ways and we don't get to be our best selves? Um, so places will feel more healing more than destructive.
Hmm.
The nonprofit industrial complex, we all know that that's just rough. It's just produce, produce, give, give, give. Um, but and the power of this work and the power of the practice of both a restorative mindset, but also a circle, so practicing authentic circle building, circle process is that influences you into your home and into your families. And I
Mm,
think that the impact of that, to be given grace, then people go home with that grace and are able to give grace to their families when conflict arises, and especially if it's a practice that's learned. People can that's been my experience when I do this work with young people. After a few weeks of the experience, they start doing it with their friends, they start doing it with their parents. Both
mhm.
their agency comes out and like, wow, this is really amazing, and really taking a lead of teaching their parents like, this is, I think this might work better when we have conflict or when you want to talk to me about something. I think this could be productive versus, all that happens with parenting. I understand that. But it's just, I think that it really could heal many more places than just a workplace.
Mhm.
And we can be our better selves.
Definitely, definitely. So tell us, what's as we close, as we wrap this up, what's the name of the book and how can people find it?
It's on all the bookshops online that you can find, whichever one is your preference. But it's called of um, the Little Book of Youth Engagement and Restorative Justice, Intergenerational Partnerships for Just and Equitable Schools. And I didn't talk too much about the intergenerational aspect, but it's the idea of is that we are all part of the solution. Young
Mhm.
people should be in the conversation. Our elders, we should learn from each other. But the intentionality is that the power of all of us working together. And we said schools, but really the book could be applicable to other environments.
Definitely. Growing up, I was raised in a rites of passage organization, and they like we were able to practice what leadership looked like, right? So we got to hold positions, we got to
Mm-hmm.
call adults out, like we held them accountable, like they held us
Mm-hmm.
accountable. And what it did was it didn't just model for me how to deal with conflict, but it really modeled for me how to be an adult, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it informed how I then work with young people and what my response is, and accepting accountability and taking their leadership. So,
Mhm.
the very last thing is, I know you, homie. You do workshops, you do trainings, you facilitate. If somebody wanted your services, if they wanted your coaching practice, how could they find you?
I'm rebuilding my website, but my name is Evelin Aki, um, which means here in Spanish. Evelin Aki 3 at gmail.com is my email, and I can give my number, but should I?
We'll attach your email address to this.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's the
Are
best
you
way right
on
now.
any platforms? Are you on Instagram or
Oh,
anything
I'm
like
in. No, all of that is under development right now, so
that?
I
Oh,
won't even go there. To be announced. Yes,
and Evelyn is with the I, right?
Evelyn's with an I.
Okay. All right.
Hmm.
Well, this is so good. I think that we got
Thank you.
enough to give organizations at least the very beginning so that they can like
Hmm.
start to like incorporate things and then hopefully hire you to come and deepen the practice
For sure.
in their institutions.
That's what's up. That's I would love that. Be honored. I am of service, and that's how I work in community and collaboration. And thank you. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. In this frame, do you see your picture down here at the bottom? You probably
No.
can't see, but your picture's down there. All right. Thank you, Mama. It's been
Thank you.
beautiful.
Bye bye.